So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for inviting me to speak about this, because one of the missing pieces of the jewelry industry, I think, has to do with words, and it has to do with stories, but moreover, it has to do with you. What exactly are you doing? And so before I get any further, I wanted to find out how many people, raise your hands if you're a jewelry designer. Here, okay, so we've got quite a few, okay. And how many of you are jewelry retail buyers or work for jewelry stores? There you go, okay. And how many of you are work in some aspect of like sales in jewelry or, okay. Okay, so we've got some professionals here. So I'm glad to see that, you know, this is a fairly professional group. The most fundamental need in design-driven and luxury jewelry is you have to figure out where you stand in terms of what you're designing, what you're creating. What's the differentiation of what you're doing? And only you know that. I don't know that. That's why I'm not putting photos up on here. I want to know how you can work towards defining what it is that you're making, doing, selling. What are you selling to the client? What kind of emotions do you want to evoke? Do you want people, like, do you want to create, if you have the kind of jewelry that is classic, do you want to create a lifelong relationship with your customers, or are you more interested in selling things for this year because you know that in another year you're going to go in a completely different design direction? What is it exactly that you're selling, you know? And in terms of emotion, I mean. How can customers feel differently, live differently, and maybe pass on these jewels that they're buying from you to the next generation? Are you thinking about the long term? If a client never imagines how and why your jewels can enhance their lives or add value to their lives or add romance to their lives or maybe add surprise and delight, you know, how can you expect to succeed? Everybody has an imagination, especially in the jewelry industry. They know about beauty. They know about grace. These are instinctive things. I mean, the reason why we love jewelry is because it's actually an innate human activity to wear something that symbolizes beauty or status or your relationship to nature. The jewelry after tools was the second thing that was created by humans. So that's another thing that you can tell when you're trying to tell your jewelry story. You can talk about, it's actually the creation of jewelry is linked to the birth of symbolic thinking in humans. And this is very important. So I see jewelry as really an essential part of being a human. And maybe this is something that you can say when you're telling your jewelry story, that, you know, this is actually a way for you to communicate visually to the rest of the world. You know, if you have a professional life, your customers have professional lives, or even if they don't have jobs, they still want to communicate identity and self to the world. And so there is a way for you to tell a compelling jewelry story about the jewels that you're making and how these jewels can help these people live, let's say, a more creative life or a more beautiful facing life, because the jewels communicate beauty. So I'm talking about fine jewelry, compelling fine jewelry stories, but I'm also talking about fashion jewelry stories. You can position anything as luxury, even if you're making jewelry out of seashells. Once you define what makes something luxurious, whether it's a jewel, a watch, a jewelry website, or your Instagram gallery, you know, you can use your Instagram gallery to tell the story of your jewels, to tell the story of your jewelry store, to tell the story of the people who design the jewels, to tell the story of the people who have maybe sourced the stones or the gold or the silver or the titanium, whatever material is in your jewels. So through my research and writing, and I have books that I've written and photo edited on jewelry. They're for sale over there in the book section. I've gained the understanding that luxury is fundamentally, it's an emotional and sensual experience. And it's typically expressed through a focus on intriguing objects, whether it's jewels such as what we're talking about here now, or the watches that Andy was talking about previously in the previous talk. What's paramount in your story is the design of a jewel, the precious metal content, the gemstones, the artisanship. When you're telling your story, there's 3 things you want to communicate to your customers or to the people who are reading your Instagram account or your website. You want to communicate what's the design value, what is the material value, let's say, of the stones or the metals or the wood or the et cetera. And then finally, what's the artisanal value? What was the skill set that went into this? Was this an extremely labor-intensive process to make this jewelry? Like, for instance, if you're making something out of titanium, that's a very difficult metal to work. So there's an incredible amount of technical and artisanal value in certain types of jewels. So I often get hired by jewelry brands and independent designers and retail stores to tell them how to make a more engaging Instagram. My Instagram is called @Bijoux Review. I have just under 100,000 followers. I'm like a couple hundred short of 100,000. But the way that I got that is also part of, it's also language-based. I hashtag in sometimes up to 8 different languages in a post because I'm trying to reach the world. And I don't speak 8 different languages. What I do is I go to Google Translate. You can do that too. You can broaden your reach massively by strategic and tactical hashtagging. So that's another way to tell a compelling jewelry story, is through using Google Translate. Beauty, artisanship, graciousness. We know that these are all key value drivers. So I have a note here, avoid confusing necessary elements with your jewelry brand's value drivers. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that most transactions are driven by facts, figures, and reality, but in jewelry, it's often the poetic stories. It's the poetic stories or the romantic stories that you tell which ignite the client's emotions and which, trigger them to purchase. So if you're not sure about what luxury jewelry is and how to communicate that to your customer, one way to think of luxury and to describe luxury is it's an emotional experience. And luxury, anything luxurious has the ability to create a strong emotional experience and also a tactile experience and a sensual experience. And it creates moods. What kind of mood do you want to create in your communications? Remember, you're doing this to engage with people. This whole jewelry business that you're in, it's all about connecting with people, bringing something beautiful to their lives, but moreover, bringing something that they're gonna wear on their bodies and show to people and talk about and maybe pass on to another generation, to a friend, a family member, a work comrade, etc. I mean, jewelry is something that is so intangible, but at the same time, so fully sensual, living on your body. People sleep in it. They go swimming in it. I mean, think about that. It's something it's not like clothes. It's not like a pair of shoes. It doesn't wear out, So if you understand the inherent design value, material value, artisanal value, and communicate that enough, and communicate the rarity of what you're selling. Or if it's not rare, communicate how it has really high production values. And that's why whatever you're selling is made in multiples, because it's beautifully made and people love it. And so that's why there's a lot of it on the market. Now I want to shift into talking about luxury research, because sometimes I audit classes at business schools who have luxury marketing professors. And that's another thing that I wanted to tell you, to suggest that maybe, if you are not sure how to tell a story that's a luxury story, one way of getting more tuned up on that subject is by, maybe start taking some online luxury marketing classes. This can be really, really useful. And I say that because I'm going to quote here some luxury research. It appears that after most people buy into a brand, that the personal association enhances the emotions and psyche of that person. And this association measurably increases self-perception, perceived expertise, the notion of greater possibilities in their personal and professional lives. This is what I'm talking about is based on psychological research done by different marketing companies that are European-based. So this whole idea of luxury jewelry, it's not so much about status, but more about feeling some kind of real power that is beautiful, that maybe expands your social opportunities, maybe helps you in business, maybe helps you in your friend group, makes your life feel more comfortable. It makes your life feel more beautiful, and maybe it makes you feel more secure. Again, depending on what you buy, what you wear, it's going to make you feel a different way. And depending on what you're selling, you have to think about, how are these pieces going to make my customers feel? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think about before they buy? How do I close the sale? Well, more about the research, and also based on my experience. People who were looking for some very special jewelry, they want something that's going to make them feel something that they'll never forget, so that something that they're going to love so much that they'll never take it off. So remember that your clients wear jewels in their minds as well in their bodies. And that's something that is also a really fun thing to communicate when you're in sales. I worked in retail, never in jewelry retail, but I've worked in high fashion retail. And I would always tell my clients, to help close the sale, I would say, well, you're going to be wearing this piece in your mind as well as out in the world. So it's got to make you feel good. So if, think about it. That kind of sell is a great way to close, because it lets you communicate respect to the customer, that they have the knowledge, the taste, and also the backbone, to make a smart decision about what they're going to wear. So I would say, when you're also creating and telling stories, think about what kind of present and future jewelry clients these people might be. Do they have children? Do they come from a big family? Do they have the kind of life that you can tell is going to be expanding and leading to more jewelry sales? You can find out an awful lot by asking very neutral, kind questions. So, remember that. Another thing that comes to mind is independent jewelry designers. Some of you are independent designers here. Again, I want to stress how in your communications, you want to be able to instantly message, how is this piece going to make the wearer feel? Or how is it going to fit in with their wardrobe? How is it going to fit in with their lifestyle? So where most jewelry designers, brands, and retailers fall down, they're telling marketing stories constructed from overused words such as iconic, incredible, elevated, curated. These words really don't mean much, and they're not telling a story. What you want is to remember that there's an oversaturation of jewelry brands in the market, right? A lot of brands are saying the same thing. All their stories are equally empty. But if every jewelry brand says that they're innovative, made with excellent and/or sustainable materials, as so many are saying, that's not a differentiating factor. So I think making a list, and what I like to tell people is, when you're trying to come up with a strategy for how to sell, you've got to have the total unique factors that you can reel off in your mind. Like, if you are the only person in your town or in your city who has a certain type of design, then say so. I mean, it's not bragging. As long as it's based on fact, you're imparting really useful information. So I say that also, if you're selling jewelry that's made in Germany and you're in Germany, talk about that. Talk about where it's made. Provide as much information as you can. Say who designed it. Name who the designer is. I also wanted to say that I've sat in on classes at some business schools in California where I'm based, and the last class I went to, the marketing professor, who is a European who consults for really high-end global holding companies that own like several jewelry companies, he predicts that up to 55% of today's luxury brands will fail to survive the transition into a Generation Z dominated world, okay? And that transition will be completed by 2030. So I think that it's worth noting this and really thinking the long term, how you've got 6 years, okay? You have 6 years to perfect emotionally compelling stories about your jewels that will reach Gen Z people who are going to have a lot of disposable income, presumably. So you want to be really keyed into thinking about that, and maybe even, use your customers who are Gen Z aged, to help you sell better, and ask them, spend a lot of time with these young people who may not have a lot of money now, but in 8 years, they're going to have disposable income. They will maybe be buying wedding rings. They will be buying engagement jewelry. They will be buying maybe even bridesmaid and, groomsmen jewelry, things like that. You don't know. One of my favorite stories about jewelry is I was selling fashion at a very super high-end department store in New York City. And it was cashmere sweaters, but it was in a showroom. Okay, so I was selling to people who were buyers from very high-end department stores. And a woman came in who looked basically like a bag lady, and she ordered the biggest order I've ever written in my life when I was selling cashmere sweaters in the showroom. So you don't know, you cannot ever judge somebody on how they look when they come into your store. The same thing if you're selling on Instagram, if people ask questions that you think, they'll direct message you and ask you questions about what's this material, what's this gemstone, or what's this metal, I've never heard of it. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Answer it. Share as much as you can and thank them for their interest. That's another thing. Little courtesies like that go a long way in making people feel like, okay, so this is a retailer who I want to, maybe contact again next year when I'm, buying a Mother's Day present or whatever. I think you get the picture. But so getting back to this whole thing about Gen Z, I can't stress it enough. These people, if you feel like you don't have enough Gen Z customers, start trying to figure out how to bring them in, carry things, ask them questions, maybe do like a simple giveaway, anything to get them in the store, anything to get them on Instagram. Also, I have found one of the biggest ways for building anybody's Instagram account, whether they're a designer, retailer, manufacturer, do a giveaway, do some kind of contest. Get those people to tag their friends. And, as long as they get people who start following you, it really works. It really works. So here we're going to get on to how the story, it's not just words, but it's also your use of imagery. I don't have imagery in this talk because I didn't want to dictate, every brand is so different. I don't know how to convince people to tell a story with other people's images. I want you to think about how you can create images. You can do anything you want with an iPhone, pretty much. If you've got some decent natural light, you can make beautiful pictures. You don't need to hire somebody. I tell most people, if you're a designer or if you're a small retailer or if you're a retail jewelry sales associate, just start showing the jewelry that you love the most and start writing about it. And, don't write about stuff that you can't really bring to life. It's not worth it. So if you only, let's say, you carry 10 different collections, certainly cover those 10 different collections in your Instagram, on your website, but, don't try and tell a story about a certain collection if you really can't do it. Get somebody else to help you with it, don't try and push something that you don't believe in, that you don't love. Because again, what I was saying before, the experience of luxury, it's about helping people feel this emotion that is somehow improving their life, giving them a feeling of pleasure, giving them a feeling of security, giving them a feeling of beauty that is valuable because it's rare. Your job as a jewelry designer, retailer, or brand executive, or media person is to tell a true story, okay? And I've written extensively for Forbes.com about greenwashing in the jewelry world, and I've got to tell you, it's better to say the truth than to make up a story about how your brand is sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, you just can't make vague claims without substantiating them. So I think full disclosure is really important. And I think that there's nothing shameful about saying, okay, so our diamonds are from, South Africa, but I don't know which mine. That's okay. As long as you can give some information that's truthful. And this is where, of course, reports from GIA about stones are really helpful, and IGI, which is another really great gem lab, which is they're here in Horgenta. IGI is fantastic, based in Antwerp. There are reports on not only stones but finished jewelry. You want to talk about the third-party certifications that any of your jewelry might have. This is really compelling and really good to have on your website, Instagram, and in store. Whether people love the brands that you're selling, remember, you and the client are in a relationship which could last a lifetime and beyond, because if they buy from you and trust you, they'll tell their family, they'll tell their friends, maybe the next generation will come in and buy. I mean, in Horgenta is filled with brands who are family heritage brands. And, they're they've sold to 4 generations of the same family all over Germany, let's say. You know, there's Gelner Pearls is here. They're a heritage brand. There's so many amazing heritage brands. And these people who are in the jewelry industry, who tell a compelling jewelry story, they have people, generations, coming back again and again. So what you do with your story, just make it deliver. Make it deliver the truth, make it deliver an experience for your customers or for your Instagram followers or for the people who come into your pop-up or your trunk shows, you know, whatever you're doing as a designer. Oh, and here's one of my favorite designers, Stella Flame. Go Stella. No, she tells great jewelry stories and has her own boutique in the Hamptons. So, you know, she tells the truth, has a great Instagram, Stella Flame Gallery. And, you know, there's a lot of ways that you can get people to come into your brick and mortar store by using your Instagram as a portal. Ultimately, you've got to provide people with a memorable experience. Yeah, we're at 2 minutes. So if anybody wants to ask me any questions or share success stories, take it away.